Hello all, welcome back. Part 2 of Lecture 4. Dr. JC here on Ancient Greece. We're going to pick up in this lecture and talk a little bit about this Delian League, this Peloponnesian War, Alexander the Great, and Hellenism. Now, it's worth noting here briefly before we get into the discussion about this Greek Delian League. This league will be started in reaction to the Persian Wars. The idea that we're going to bring together all these Greek city-states to deal with this outside threat that is Persia. The League was created for three reasons. First, to prepare for any potential future invasion from Persia, to seek or exact some degree of revenge on Persia, and to organize a means to divide any spoils of war that might come about. As a requirement to become a member of this league, each city-state had to either provide men for armed service or provide tax dollars to go in a general treasury. This general treasury for the league would be held in Athens. Key point. While all of the deposits into the league's fund didn't move officially into Athens until the reign of Pericles, it's important to note that the Athenians did control the funds early on, and they almost immediately began to, for all intents and purposes, misuse them. The Athenians began to use these funds for the creation of their own navy, to enhancements of their own city-state. And naturally, the other city-states begin to furl an eyebrow and say, bro, what's up? I mean, you guys are using this cash that's supposed to be for our mutual benefit for the benefit of your own city-state. You're creating your own Athenian empire, as historians refer to it, at our expense. This is crazy. The continued misuse of Delian League funds by Athens was sort of the straw that broke the camel's back. I mean, Sparta was looking for an opportunity to go ahead and break up the leadership of these Greek states under Athenian control and reinsert themselves as leaders in the south. And they will use this misuse of Delian League funds to gather city-states to them, and we will see the creation then and beginning of this Peloponnesian War, or war between the Greek states. Athens on one side, Sparta on the other. Well, we're not going to talk about the entire war here and get really granular. For those that are interested, I would ask that you research it a little further. I did want to talk about one major turning point, and that happens to come at the Battle of HIS116. As mentioned when we talked about the Persian Wars, we talked about the creation of the Greek phalanx, and then we also talked about the Greek trireme and how Athens, the Athenians, under Themistocles, were individuals that created this great navy. Thus, for all intents and purposes, as it related to the Greek world and Greek city-states, Athens was the major naval power, Sparta the major land power. Therefore, as long as Athens had control of the sea, they could re-provision their city-state Athens, even if surrounded by Sparta and its allies. Even if placed under siege, Athens could still address the siege from land by supplying the city from sea. Therefore, as long as they controlled the waterways, they were good to go and could continue to fight. Look, the Spartans were no idiots. They recognized that we need to do something to counter this Athenian fleet. If we can defeat the Athenian fleet, the game's up, we win. And Aegispotami did that. This is where Sparta and its allies were able to defeat an Athenian fleet, and for all intents and purposes, this brought about an end to the war. Therefore, Sparta and its allies, they're victorious. They've won this war. Yet the question becomes, what was the larger impact of this Peloponnesian War? How did it impact neighboring states like Persia at all? What was the impact of the war? As mentioned briefly on the slide here, these 27 years that encompass this Peloponnesian War, it weakened all Greek city-states. Not just Athens, not just Sparta, everyone. It did. And in some sense, it destroyed any possibility of a renewal of a Delian League. The jealousies were there to begin with Athenian misuse of funds. They're definitely long entrenched animosities between warring city-states now. Therefore, a Delian League, a league that was brought together for Greeks to defend themselves against outsiders, the likelihood of that happening again is next to nil. Because there was a lack of central power in the Greek world, there was no federal capital like we have in Washington, D.C. per se. There wasn't. This cycle of warfare would continue past the Peloponnesian War. As individual Greek city-states continued to pound one another away, all they did was weaken Greek society within. Therefore, neighbors who might be interested in taking over the Greek world, how much easier if everyone is divided? What's the old adage? United we stand, divided we fall. A decentralized structure in the Greek world, like in Mesopotamia, led to outside invasion. And we're going to see that in the form of Alexander the Great and his father. Prior to any discussion about Alexander the Great, we have to talk about his father, Philip II. Now, Philip II of Macedon is the individual that's going to establish the war machine that will be inherited by Alexander the Great. Philip II, having spent time in the Greek world, on his own accord and forcibly, learned how the Greeks fought, whether they be Athenian by sea or Spartan by land. In fact, he had a great respect for the Spartans themselves. Using the Spartan model, Philip II recognized an opportunity to potentially invade and conquer all of Greece, especially in the wake of the Peloponnesian Wars. He recognized the status of most all city-states within the region being weakened because of these continued wars, and he will begin to march his Macedonian armies throughout Greece and conquer. Now I want you to take a look at the map on the slide here, and if you look down the bottom, there's a purple colored area, highlighted area around Sparta. Interesting point here. Philip II will conquer much of Greece, but he will not conquer Sparta. There's a reason for that. Philip II recognized and respected the strength of Sparta, recognized their need and desire to be in control of the Greek city-states. And in keeping with Sun Tzu's maxims of war, again, this isn't to say that Philip II read Sun Tzu. He didn't. But he did apply one of the key maxims from Sun Tzu. Sun Tzu would have us all remember in his Art of War that we need to avoid what is strong and attack what is weak. If Sparta is the strength in the Greek world, don't attack it. Attack everything else. That's what Philip II did. Rather than go toe-to-toe with Sparta and potentially grind down the power of his own army, he decided to cut a deal. He said, look, Spartans, here's the gig. You cats can go ahead and control the Greek world. We might demand a little bit of tribute from some of the city-states that require that they pay us money or provide soldiers every now and again moving forward. But you're going to be able to control the affairs on the Greek peninsula. We, in turn, are going to focus our attention against a common enemy you used to have and maybe still do have, the Persians. What Philip II is going to do then is, rather than keep his army stationed or garrisoned throughout the Greek world, which siphons off troops, costs money, he's going to let the Spartans maintain control for the Macedonians in Greece so that he can march his entire army on Persia. Despite all of the hard fighting, diplomatic maneuvering, etc. that Philip II has been able to do as it relates to the conquest of Greece, as he gets ready to eye Persia, a change occurs. He is assassinated, killed. Look, to present day, historians, archaeologists, et al. Still are trying to figure out who's responsible for this assassination. One theory contends that it was Alexander the Great himself. After all, if Alexander wanted to come to power, you can't come to power until daddy's gone. If you want to run the family business, so to speak, march armies, you need to get rid of the owner or your daddy. So maybe you help him slip on some tea, right? And you take control. We don't know who was responsible for the assassination of Philip II. He was assassinated, and because of that, Alexander the Great would come to power. That's the key point. Akin to the Peloponnesian War, I'm not going to get into the granularity or specifics as it relates to the campaigns and conquests of Alexander the Great. They're too numerous. Rather, I would make specific mention that he did conquer Persia. He would conquer Egypt as well. Two of the greatest powers of the ancient world are now under his control. And he's in his early 20s. Would you not think of yourself as a living god? And in some sense, Alexander the Great would come to believe this. After all, how else could he go out front and lead? And he did lead from front and seem to go through battle after battle unscathed and conquer some of the greatest civilizations in history, would you not think that you are blessed by the Most High God or gods that rule over man's earthly realm? That you would have to be. Who else could accomplish this? Another aspect of Alexander the Great I'll mention briefly here was his tutor or his mentor. It was none other than Aristotle himself. You say, okay, Aristotle who, right? Well, those of you that know a little something about Greek philosophy, there were three great Greek philosophers: Plato, Aristotle, and Socrates. One of his mentors or personal teachers or tutors was Aristotle himself. And Aristotle was really instrumental in making a warrior philosopher out of Alexander the Great. His training in the arts from Aristotle will help him determine how he wants to approach and effectively administer rule in these regions he's conquered. Alexander the Great wants to create a new empire. How do I get people that don't like me to buy into my new system? This is where the arts are going to help him. Understanding the lessons of history taught to him by Aristotle, he recognized that the Cyrus the Greats of the world had good models. If you want to do long-lasting empires, the best way to do this is through toleration rather than fear. Because Alexander the Great was interested in creating a new empire, he decided that he was going to use toleration as a central key or keystone to his empire. Thus, rather than impose Greek culture and rule on conquered peoples like Persians and Egyptians, he said what we're going to do rather is embrace Persia, embrace Egypt, embrace the peoples and their cultures and their customs and their mores and spiritualities, and fold them in, meld them with Greek culture to create this something new. And this something new is known as Hellenism or a Hellenistic era. This is the era of Alexander the Great. This is his mindset that we are, through acculturation, A-C-C-U-L-T, we are going to meld all these different cultures and customs and mores. Take the best of the best and create something new. Thus, this toleration then will allow individuals within conquered lands to look at Alexander the Great as less a conqueror and maybe more of a liberator. Yet, just as Alexander the Great begins the work of creating a new capital city in Susa, in Persia, interestingly enough, he dies. While the causes of Alexander's death are still unknown today and highly debated, there are several contending theories. Maybe he was poisoned. Assassination was not an unheard of thing back in the day. Remember, Philip II was assassinated, his father as well. Or perhaps Alexander may have just died of natural causes. It could have been typhoid or malaria. We just don't know. What we do know is that once he passes, there's a great scramble for power that takes place, and different components of his empire will begin to be ripped apart by different individuals looking to replace him as overall leader. So we will see the splintering of this brief Alexander the Great's empire or Hellenistic empire. Prior to closing our lecture here on Greece, there's a couple other aspects of Greek society I wanted to talk about. First and foremost, spirituality. I'm reasonably confident most all of you know about the Greek gods, Zeus, Apollo, et al., right? But maybe you have not considered the importance of Greek oracles. Oracles were places where individuals could go and where individuals, whether they be priests or priestesses, could commune with the gods, so to speak, and share their vision, soothsayers of sorts. You and I might read our fortunes daily or go have tarot cards or our tea leaves read, right? Same sort of deal in the Greek world. Beyond any life path direction or support these oracles might be able to provide for individuals, folks throughout the Greek world also looked to drama in some sense to help shape society, discussions about society, the direction of society. So it wasn't just about getting one's life and purpose right, what the Greeks would call a telos or teleology. It was about society as well. Thus, whether these plays were comedies or tragedies, it didn't matter. The playwrights and actors wanted people to leave the theater and go to local taverns, pubs, whatever it might be, and discuss the basis or morals of what was presented to them. Thus, Greek dramas examined the soul of society, just as oracles examined the soul of the individual. While tough to do ancient Greece in 30 minutes, hopefully we at least touch some major points. Dr. JC,